This is 5.6 Appendicular Skeleton Notes. The essential question is, what are the bones that make up the pectoral and pelvic girdles, and what are the names and locations of the appendicular skeleton? Notice that we already went over the exoskeleton portion, so we'll concentrate on the appendicular. Appendicular again is made up of the pectoral girdle, which supports the upper limbs, and the bones of the upper limb, which includes the arm, the forearm, and the bones of the wrist and hand. Then also includes the pelvic girdle, which supports the upper torso, and where the lower limbs are attached to, which include the bones of the thigh, the leg, the ankle, and the foot. Again, the appendicular skeleton is made up of the bones that form the upper and lower limbs or extremities, the pectoral girdle, which supports the upper limb, and the pelvic girdle, which supports the entire upper torso. Think of a girdle like a woman wears to support their body. So think of the pectoral girdle as the two bones that support the entire upper limb. The pectoral girdle is made up of the clavicle, which is attached medially to the sternum. So the sternum will be here, which is the breastbone, and laterally it is attached to the humerus. The reason it says that the clavicle is only attached to the sternum is because the humerus is completely supported by ligaments and tendons. So the only bony attachment that the clavicle has is to the sternum. The other bone that makes up the pectoral girdle is the scapula, and what the clavicle plus the scapula creates this really shallow indentation where the humerus attaches to, and the entire humerus is attached to the scapula and to the clavicle by muscles and tendons. Scapula also is attached to the back of the rib cage via muscles also. Bones of the upper limb is made up of the arm bone, which is the humerus. The humerus is attached to the clavicle and the scapula proximally, and then will be attached to the ulna distally, and only the ulna. There are two bones that make up the forearm. The ulna is the medial bone in the anatomical position. Remember that the palms of the hand is facing forward or anteriorly, so the ulna is on the medial side or the pinky side, and it is the taller of the bone that is directly attached to the humerus. And then laterally, or the thumb side, is the radius, which is much shorter than the ulna. Bones of the hand is made up by the carpals, which are the wrist bones, and there are 8 of them. The metacarpals are the bones that make up the palms of the hand in the pink, and then the phalanges are the bones that make up the fingers. The pelvic girdle, again, girdle means support, so pelvic girdle supports the entire upper torso, the trunk of the body, and then the pelvic girdle is balanced by the 2 thigh and leg bone. The pelvic girdle is protection for the organs, specifically the reproductive organs, the urinary bladder, and parts of the lower portions of the large intestine. The pelvic girdle is made by the 2 coxal bones, the right and the left one, which are your hip bones, and the sacrum and the coccyx. Remember that the sacrum is the bone that makes up the small of the back, and the coccyx is the tailbone, but those 2 bones are part of the axial skeleton. Only the coxal bone of the pelvic girdle is part of the appendicular skeleton. The coxal bone is made up of the ilium on the lateral portion, and the ischium, which is called the sit-down bone, is because it's the bone that you are actually sitting on when you are sitting. And then the pubis, which is the front or the anterior portion of the coxal bone. Here are the bones that make up the pelvic girdle. Again, the pelvic girdle is made up of the coxal bone, the sacrum, and the coccyx, but the only one that is part of the appendicular skeleton is the coxal bone, because sacrum and the coccyx is part of the axial skeleton. The coxal bone is a fusion of 3 bones, the biggest one being the ilium, which is the lateral portion of the coxal bone. The joint between the ilium and the sacrum is called the sacroiliac joint. Then the bottom or the posterior portion is made by the ischium, which is in the yellow, and this is called the sit-down bone because it's the bone that you sit on. The anterior or the front portion in the pink are your 2 pubic bones, pubic bone or the pubis. The joint holding the 2 halves of the pubic bone or the pubis is called the pubic symphysis joint. Here's the side or the lateral view, so you can see the big portion, majority of the portion of the coxal bone is made up of the ilium. The back and the bottom portion is made up of the ischium bone, and in the blue, the anterior portion is made by the pubis. And where they all join together is this socket, the hip socket, and that area is called the acetabulum. There is a difference in shape and weight of the pelvic bone, the pelvis, between a female and a male, and the main reason for that is that female needs to give birth, and the pelvis is a birth canal for the baby to come through. So in females, it has to be larger and rounder, which is the space. Pelvic inlet is the space, the hole in the pelvis, and then in males, it is narrower and heart-shaped. The pubic arch or the pubic arch angle in females are more than 90 degrees, and males it's less than 90 degrees. Whereas male pelvis is more taller and narrower, female pelvis is shallower and wider, and they're lighter in weight. The ilia, which is the plural of ilium, flare out more than the males, so there's a tendency for the female to have a wider hip because of that. And then the sacrum is shorter and it's less curved. And then there is a portion on the ischium called the ischiospine, is much shorter and further apart in females than males. On the left you have the female pelvis, and on the right you have the male pelvis. And the first thing you notice is that the female pelvis is much shorter and males are much taller. The width of the female is much wider than the male. The reason for that is that the ilia in the female flares out more on female than males. That's why women tend to have more of a wider hip than males. And because the female pelvis is wider and shorter, this angle, which is called the pubic angle, notice that it is wider than 90 in females, whereas it's less than 90 in males. And a lot of the differences that you see in male and female pelvis has to do with this pelvic inlet. Notice that in the female, it is a wide, round, or oval opening, whereas in males, it is more of a narrow and a heart-shaped opening. It's much easier to get a baby's head through that opening rather than the opening that is created by the heart. For that reason, the female sacrum is much shorter and less curved, whereas the male is much longer and it's more curved. That's why in the male, the top view, you can kind of see the tailbone or the coccyx kind of sticking through. You could see through the opening, whereas because the female sacrum is much shorter and less curved, you don't see a lot of it, and so there is no blockage of that opening. The pelvic inlet is not blocked. That's also the reason why the ischiospine, which is the pointy part, the back part of the ischium, is less pronounced in the female, and it sticks out a lot more. It's taller in the male because that it closes up part of that opening, whereas females, it is open more for the baby to be able to get through. The pelvic girdle is supported by the two thigh bones. So the acetabulum is what the femur, the head of the femur fits into. These are the left and the right, and these are the largest bone in the body. The femur is attached proximally to the coxal bone through the acetabulum, and then distally to the tibia would be on the bottom portion like that. And it's only attached to the tibia, not the fibula. There are two bones that make up the leg. The medial bone, or the big toe side bone, is the tibia. Remember, the T that you can see is the tibia. It is attached proximally to the femur, and distally it is attached to the talus bone which is part of the tarsal bones, the ankle bones. So all the weight is on the tibia, and then the lateral or the little toe side is formed by the fibula, and there is no weight on that bone. It just kind of hangs out on the side. The foot is made up of the 8 tarsal bones. The two that you need to know is the heel bone, which is the calcaneus, and the talus, which is the bone that the tibia sits on top of. The metatarsals in the pink make up the bones of the foot, and then the toe bones are called phalanges. Here's a side view or lateral view of the two bones that you need to know in the ankle, which is the calcaneus, which is the heel bone, and then the talus, which is the bone that the tibia sits on top of. 5.6 notes homework is number 1, name the bones that make up the upper and lower extremities. Number 2, which two bones are the largest bones of the ankle? Number 3, what are the functions of the pectoral and the pelvic girdles?